There's something almost magical about school field trips. The night before, you can barely sleep. Your backpack is packed, your lunch is ready, and you're buzzing with excitement. The bus ride is filled with laughter, whispered secrets, and the thrill of being away from the classroom, even if just for a day. For most of us, field trips are some of the best memories of childhood. Moments of freedom, adventure, and discovery. But what if those memories weren't so innocent? What if, instead of laughter and learning, your field trip became the setting for your worst nightmare? Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories that will make you look at field trips in a completely different way. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. They're real accounts from people who thought they were in for a day of fun, only to find themselves trapped in situations they could never have imagined. Most people never hear what really happens when things go wrong on a field trip. The stories you're about to hear aren't the ones teachers tell parents, or that make it into the yearbook. They're the ones whispered about in hushed voices, the ones that haunt those who lived through them. So buckle up and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that start with the most ordinary days. These stories will change the way you see field trips forever. It was supposed to be the highlight of our junior year, a field trip to the old St. Mary's Hospital, a local landmark that had been closed for decades. Our history teacher, Mr. Carter, was obsessed with local lore and convinced the school board to let us tour the building as part of a project on the town's past. We all thought it would be boring, maybe a little creepy, but nothing we couldn't handle. The morning of the trip, the air was buzzing with excitement. We joked about ghosts and dared each other to touch the rusted gates as we filed off the bus. The hospital loomed over us, its windows dark and empty, the brickwork stained by years of rain and neglect. Still, in the daylight, it felt more like an adventure than a threat. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old medicine. Our footsteps echoed down long, empty corridors lined with peeling paint and broken tiles. Mr. Carter led us from room to room, sharing stories about the hospital's heyday, how it had once been the pride of the town, how it had closed suddenly after a mysterious fire in the basement. At first, we were more interested in taking selfies and making jokes than listening to the history lesson. But as we moved deeper into the building, the mood began to shift. The light from the windows grew dimmer, and the temperature seemed to drop. Someone pointed out that their phone had lost signal. Another student, Jamie, swore she heard footsteps behind us, but when we turned, the hallway was empty. We reached the old children's ward, and that's when things started to get really strange. The room was filled with tiny beds, some still made up with faded sheets. A few of us wandered off to explore, but Mr. Carter quickly called us back, warning us not to get separated. That's when we realized that one of our classmates, Mark, was missing. At first, we thought he was playing a prank. Mark was always the class clown, and it wouldn't be the first time he'd tried to scare us. We called his name, our voices echoing through the empty halls, but there was no answer. Mr. Carter's face grew serious, and he told us all to stay together while he and another teacher went to look for Mark. Minutes passed. The group huddled together, whispering nervously. The hospital, which had seemed so harmless in the daylight, now felt like a maze of shadows and secrets. Every creak and groan of the old building made us jump. Someone started crying quietly. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang from somewhere below us. Mr. Carter's voice called out, but it sounded distant, muffled by the thick walls. Against his instructions, a few of us broke away from the group, determined to find Mark ourselves. We followed the sound down a narrow staircase that led to the basement, the very place where the fire had started all those years ago. The basement was colder than the rest of the hospital, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Our flashlights flickered as we moved through the darkness, the beams catching on old gurneys and rusted equipment. That's when we saw Mark, standing at the far end of the room, staring at something on the wall. We called his name, but he didn't respond. As we got closer, we saw that he was shaking, his eyes wide with terror. On the wall in front of him, someone, or something, had scratched words into the plaster. "Stay with us." Suddenly, the lights went out completely. In the pitch black, we heard footsteps all around us, shuffling, dragging, getting closer. Someone screamed. We grabbed Mark and ran, tripping over debris as we scrambled back up the stairs. When we finally burst into the daylight, Mark collapsed on the grass, sobbing uncontrollably. The teachers called the trip off immediately. We never found out who or what had written those words in the basement. Mark wouldn't talk about what he saw, and he transferred to another school a few weeks later. Some people said he was never the same after that day. The school board banned all future trips to St. Mary's, and the hospital was finally demolished the following year. But those of us who were there still remember the feeling of being watched, the cold that seeped into our bones, and the message scratched into the wall. What we found in the basement was never explained, and some say the student was never the same again. But if you ask anyone who was on that field trip, they'll tell you. There are some places that should stay abandoned, and some stories that are better left untold. Field trips are supposed to be safe. That's what we're told. Anyway, teachers double-check permission slips, chaperones count heads, and every detail is planned to make sure nothing goes wrong. For most students, a field trip is just a break from routine, a day to learn, laugh, and make memories outside the classroom. But the truth is, even the best-laid plans can unravel in an instant. According to a recent study, thousands of students are injured or go missing on school trips every year. Most of these incidents are minor, but some are never fully explained. Sometimes, the places we trust the most can hide the darkest secrets. If you thought the abandoned hospital was unsettling, the next story will make you question every outdoor adventure you've ever taken. Because when you're far from home, surrounded by nothing but trees and darkness, help can feel a million miles away. Most people don't realize how quickly a fun day can turn into a nightmare. But after hearing what happened on one middle school camping trip, you might never look at the woods the same way again. Every year, our middle school organized a weekend camping trip to Pine Hollow Forest. It was supposed to be a rite of passage. 2 nights under the stars, campfire stories, and a chance to feel grown up away from home. For most of us, it was the highlight of 7th grade. We packed our bags with snacks, flashlights, and sleeping bags, ready for adventure. The first day was everything we hoped for. We hiked winding trails, spotted deer in the distance, and roasted marshmallows as the sun dipped behind the trees. That night, we gathered around the fire while our counselor, Mr. Evans, told ghost stories. We laughed and shivered, pretending not to be scared, but secretly glancing over our shoulders at the dark woods pressing in around us. As the fire died down, we crawled into our tents, the forest alive with the sounds of crickets and distant owls. I remember lying awake, listening to the wind in the branches, feeling both safe and exposed at the same time. That's when I first noticed the lights. Small, flickering orbs moving between the trees, too steady to be fireflies, too erratic to be flashlights. I nudged my friend Sam, whispering about the lights, but he just grumbled and rolled over. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the feeling of unease lingered. The next morning, everyone was buzzing about the lights. Some kids claimed they'd seen figures moving in the shadows, but the adults brushed it off as overactive imaginations. We spent the day canoeing and playing games, but the mood had shifted. Even Mr. Evans seemed distracted, glancing nervously at the tree line. That night, the woods felt different, heavier, quieter, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The counselors did a head count before bed, reminding us to stay in our tents after dark. But sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight, I heard footsteps crunching in the leaves outside. At first, I thought it was just another camper sneaking to the bathroom, but the steps didn't sound right. Too slow, too deliberate. Suddenly, a scream tore through the night. We all bolted upright, hearts pounding. The counselors rushed from tent to tent, trying to calm everyone down. That's when we realized Mr. Evans was missing. Panic set in. The adults tried to keep us together, but fear spread like wildfire. Some kids were crying, others were frantically calling their parents on cell phones that barely had a signal. The remaining counselors organized a search party, leaving us huddled together by the dying campfire. Hours passed. The woods seemed to close in around us, every snap of a twig making us jump. Then, just before dawn, the search party returned, without Mr. Evans. They told us to pack up immediately. No one spoke as we loaded the buses, eyes fixed on the ground. Back at school, rumors flew. Some said Mr. Evans had run off. Others whispered about wild animals or even escaped convicts. But those of us who saw the lights knew it was something else. The police searched the forest for days but found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, not even a trace of where he'd gone. A week later, Sam showed me something he'd found in his backpack. A scrap of paper he swore hadn't been there before. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't follow the lights." To this day, no one knows what happened to Mr. Evans. The school canceled all future camping trips, and Pine Hollow was eventually closed to the public. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, people say you can still see strange lights flickering between the trees at night. Some of us still have nightmares about that weekend. The footsteps, the lights, the feeling of being watched. And every so often, I wonder what would have happened if we'd followed those lights, or if Mr. Evans had ignored them. To this day, no one knows what was out there, or if it's still waiting for its next victim. Imagine being on that camping trip, waking up in the middle of the night, surrounded by darkness, knowing that someone is missing and something is out there watching. Would you have been brave enough to search the woods? Or would you have stayed huddled by the fire, hoping daylight would come before anything else did? It's easy to think these things only happen in stories, that you'd never be the one caught in a nightmare. But the truth is, no one ever expects it until it's too late. Sometimes, the places we trust the most, the ones filled with laughter and learning, can turn into the setting for our worst fears. And if you thought the woods were unsettling, the next story will make you question the safety of even the most ordinary places. Because the final story didn't happen in the wilderness or an abandoned building. It happened in a place everyone thought was completely safe, surrounded by security and bright lights. The next story will make you think twice before visiting a museum after hours. What happened there was so disturbing, the security footage was never released, and the missing student's story remains a mystery. For most kids, a field trip to the city museum is a dream come true. Dinosaurs, ancient artifacts, and the thrill of exploring endless halls with your friends. What could be safer? That's what everyone thought when Mrs. Langley's 5th grade class won a special overnight stay at the Metropolitan Museum, a prize for winning the school's science fair. The night started with excitement and wide eyes. The museum staff led the group through exhibits after hours, letting them see behind-the-scenes rooms and touch artifacts usually kept behind glass. The kids ate pizza in the cafeteria, played trivia games, and even got to sleep in sleeping bags beneath the giant blue whale in the main atrium. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. But as the lights dimmed and the museum settled into silence, the atmosphere changed. The vast, echoing halls that had felt magical in the daylight now seemed endless and cold. Shadows stretched across the marble floors, and every sound, every creak, every distant thud, seemed amplified in the darkness. Around midnight, a group of students dared each other to sneak away from the chaperones and explore the Egyptian wing. Among them was a quiet boy named Ethan, who was always curious but never reckless. The group tiptoed past the sleeping teachers, giggling as they slipped into the hall lined with ancient statues and sarcophagi. At first, it was just fun, posing for photos with the mummies, whispering about curses, and daring each other to touch the glass cases. But then, Ethan noticed something strange. One of the statues, a tall stone figure with a broken face, seemed to have shifted. He could have sworn it was facing the opposite direction when they entered. He pointed it out, but the others laughed it off. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The air felt heavy, and the temperature seemed to drop. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the hall into near darkness. The group froze, their laughter dying instantly. That's when they heard it. A soft, shuffling sound, like footsteps on the polished floor. The kids huddled together, whispering Ethan's name, but he was gone. Panic set in as they searched the hall, calling for him in hushed, desperate voices. There was no answer. They ran back to the atrium, breathless and terrified, waking the teachers and security guards. The museum staff immediately began searching, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. The security team checked every room, every closet, every exit. The only thing they found was Ethan's flashlight, lying on the floor in front of the broken-faced statue. The police were called, and the museum was locked down. The remaining students were gathered in the cafeteria, some crying, others too shocked to speak. Hours passed as officers combed through security footage, but something was wrong. The cameras in the Egyptian wing had glitched, showing only static during the time Ethan disappeared. When the footage finally resumed, the statue with the broken face was facing a different direction than before. No one could explain it. The museum staff insisted the statue was too heavy to move, and there was no sign of forced entry or exit anywhere in the building. Ethan was never found. His parents, desperate for answers, appeared on the news, pleading for information. The museum quietly canceled all future overnight events, and the Egyptian wing was closed for renovations soon after. Some of the kids who were there that night say they still have nightmares of wandering endless, empty halls, of statues that move when you're not looking, of a cold hand grabbing them in the dark. Others refuse to talk about it at all. The strangest part? A few weeks later, a janitor cleaning the Egyptian wing found a child's drawing tucked behind the broken-faced statue. It was a crude sketch of the museum at night, with a small figure standing alone in the shadows, surrounded by tall, faceless shapes. On the back, in Ethan's handwriting, were the words, "Don't look away." The security footage from that night was never released, and the missing student's story remains a mystery. Some say the museum is still haunted by what happened, and that if you visit after dark, you might catch a glimpse of a boy wandering the halls, searching for a way out. Field trips are supposed to be the safest, most memorable days of our school years, moments we look back on with nostalgia and a smile. But as you've just heard, sometimes the most ordinary adventures can take a turn into the unknown, leaving scars that never quite heal. From the abandoned hospital's chilling basement, to the haunted silence of the forest, to the museum's endless, echoing halls, each story is a reminder that horror doesn't always wait for the dark of night or the middle of nowhere. Sometimes, it finds us in the places we trust the most, when we least expect it. What happened to Mark in the hospital, to Mr. Evans in the woods, to Ethan in the museum? The truth is, no one really knows. Their stories are whispered about, half-remembered, and sometimes dismissed as legend. But for those who were there, the fear was, and still is, very real. So the next time you board a bus for a field trip, or watch your child head off for a day of fun, remember, not every story ends with everyone coming home. Some field trips end in ways that are never spoken of, in stories that are never told. There are even more terrifying field trip stories out there, some too disturbing to share. Will you be the next to experience one?